So, in looking at the section of the article uh, where he meets possible objections, obviously I don't have time. You just have to read it, and I can't go through every one. I just want to focus on objection 2 here on page 382. This is a possible objection to his argument. It says the cases you described in support of premises 2 and 3 are bound to be taken by the naturalist as evidence against premise 1. Remember, premise 1 is that we always have most reason to do what is morally right. And I think that is that is the weak point of the argument. That is, do we really accept that premise that in every case we have most reason to do what is morally right? His response to that is interesting. His reply below, it says, first of all, my moral cases, that is Ms. Poore and Ms. Goodwin, provide evidence against premise 1 only on the assumption that there is no God and no life after death. But one can hardly make this assumption and give the argument an open-ended run for its money. It is, after all, an argument for God's existence. So if the naturalist regards my moral cases as evidence against 1, the naturalist is begging the question, and the dialectical error is on the naturalist's side. So, yeah, sorry, just stop there for a moment. So if the naturalist regards my moral cases as evidence against 1, the naturalist is begging the question. But basically, the naturalist is begging the question in the sense that they're assuming that God doesn't exist. If you assume that God doesn't exist, then premise 1 is wrong. If you assume that God does exist, then I suppose premise 1 is definitely true. So it all kind of, I think that the interesting thing to ask yourself now is whether you think that premise 1 is a rock solid truth. Premise 1, again, being that we always have most reason to do that which is morally right. Do you think that that is actually true? And is the premise 3 that sometimes when it involves a great sacrifice, do we actually have more reason to do what is prudentially more, what is more prudential? That is, are there situations in which doing the wrong thing is the right thing to do? Which is, I guess, what premise 3 actually says. That when it comes to making great sacrifices for the sake of very modest benefits or avoiding very modest harms, is it actually right to do what's wrong, to avoid making that sacrifice? It's a really great question, I think.